As you may have heard, the ICC Women's World Cup qualifier was recently cancelled as players from the participating countries scrambled to get home ahead of the travel bans imposed due to the emerging Omicron variant of COVID-19. The upshot being that the ICC used its ODI rankings to determine that the 3 available places at next year's 2022 Women's World Cup in New Zealand were awarded to the West Indies, Pakistan and Bangladesh, with 2 additional slots into the 2022 to 2025 Women's Championship League granted to Sri Lanka and Ireland. This decision sparked a furore from followers of associate cricket and most notably Thailand, who had a strong campaign and were in an excellent position to progress to the Women's Championship at least and possibly even challenge for a slot at the World Cup. Thailand were at the top of their group with 3 wins in 4 matches when the tournament was called off, having beaten full members Zimbabwe and Bangladesh, as well as the USA. They were guaranteed of progressing into the Super 6 phase, where the top 5 teams were supposed to qualify for the Women's Championship, and the top 3 teams for the World Cup. So, in a group with 6 teams, a top 5 finish was a very strong possibility, especially since they were guaranteed of carrying points forward from at least one of their matches. This decision is undoubtedly among the absolute worst the ICC has ever made. Firstly, the fact the tournament has been cancelled entirely shows a dereliction of duty from an organisation whose ostensible purpose is to organise cricket tournaments. Suspending it with the travel ban springing up was entirely reasonable, but there are still 3 full months before the World Cup starts, and even more time before the Women's Championship. Finding a way to determine standings on the field should not be outside the ICC's capacity. They could, for example, run a preliminary round in New Zealand just ahead of the World Cup. Bringing in a couple of extra teams a week early is pretty easy, as we saw at the T20 World Cup just last month. They could decide the World Cup slots on rankings and run a scaled-down playoff for the 2 championship slots. They could even organise a direct playoff between Ireland, the last team on rankings, and Thailand, the team most egregiously robbed by the decision. But no, the ICC didn't do any of these things. They just pulled the pin and went with the option involving the absolute least effort on their part. The second, and even greater injustice, goes to the fact that the rankings were used at all. Fundamentally, the rankings are a closed shop, because to have an ODI ranking, a team needs ODI status. This was made abundantly clear on the first day's play when the ICC backtracked on a previous commitment to award ODI status to matches at its World Cup qualifiers, and withdrew ODI status from matches played by Thailand, the Netherlands and the USA. So, despite the fact that Thailand are literally not allowed to play ODIs, they were excluded on the basis of ODI rankings. It's absurd. Further highlighting the absurdity of the decision is that the only reason Ireland had an ODI ranking at all is because they played a 3-match series in 2018 against New Zealand. They lost every match by over 300 runs, but those 3 ODI defeats 3 years ago were enough to put them on the rankings table, and thus put them into the Women's Championship going forward next year. There is, of course, a third, more systemic problem, and that's the ICC's insistence on having such a narrow field in the first place. 8 World Cup teams? In 1997 there were 11. 25 years later we're somehow 3 teams short. Even the Women's Championship, which was expanded this time from 8 to 10, is an example of artificial scarcity, creating headaches for the ICC. Why not expand to 12, including both Thailand and Zimbabwe? It's not like Afghanistan will have a women's team anytime soon, so split the championship into 2 conferences of 6 teams each. Or even do a divisional structure with promotion and relegation. Far from being a drain on resources, this would actually save the ICC money, since a 10-team round robin means 45 ODI series to organise, whereas 2 groups of 6 teams means 15 series per group for 30 total. This is low-hanging fruit. The ICC could expand opportunities for associate women's cricket, whilst needing to subsidise 33% fewer matches. And to round out this point, it's worth bringing up another structural flaw which is highlighted by Thailand, and indeed Zimbabwe's dire situation, and that's being denied a place in the Women's Championship means they get absolutely no 50-over cricket until 2025. The ICC's all-or-nothing approach to development pathways means that if a team misses out on one of the rare qualifying opportunities, their cricket's left to stagnate for years waiting for another chance. It's simply a ridiculous model for growing a sport, and this decision with Thailand is basically a confluence of events highlighting a number of really problematic aspects to the ICC development pathway, all happening at the same time.